Hi, this is Pastor Lutzer of Running to Win, heard daily on Bible School Radio, 91.3 KDKR, Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, and on 91.3 KYJC, Commerce.
Portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, more life than money. How not to outlive your savings. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. So how do you not outlive your money? Today, author and financial advisor Anthony Saccaro is here to weigh in. Anthony, welcome to Prudent Money.
Hey, Bob. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, let's start off with what you write about, which is really, I totally agree, the biggest problem. What people don't know about retirement is the problem and can actually hurt them. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's the number one problem is you don't know what you don't know, and we've always been told that what you don't know can't hurt you, and that's a lie, and everyone knows that's a lie. And it's a very big lie when it comes to retirement, and unfortunately, there are so many unknowns that people have out there when it comes to different retirement topics, whether it's investing right for the stage of life you're in or when to collect Social Security or required minimum distributions, that people think they know, and it's not what you do know that's going to hurt you, it's what you don't know that's going to hurt you, and that's why I wrote the book. There's 10 chapters about 10 different things in the book that you don't know about that could absolutely wreck your retirement, any one of them, and a lot of people are making more than one mistake.
You know, it's interesting because there's all types of ways that you can develop a financial plan, yet even with a plan, some still outlive their money. I mean, it seems that the ones who are okay versus the ones that outlive their money comes down to one key distinction, and they don't really consider this, and that is they plan not to outlive their money, but they live a lot longer than they have planned for. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's exactly right. And when you boil investments down to simplicity, you can invest for growth or you can invest for income. Growth means that you're relying on capital appreciation. You buy low and you sell high, and it's all about the share price. And that's great when you are heading towards retirement and you're dollar cost averaging and you're saving. That's what you should be when you have 20 years or more to retirement. But when you get to retirement and you quit putting money in and now you start spending down or you start withdrawing from a growth-oriented portfolio, then, Bob, what happens is you have to sell shares to get your income, and the moment that you sell your first share to get the cash you need is the moment that you put yourself in a race against time, and you're really hoping that you die before your money does. And that's what most financial advisors out there are proposing. That's what most retirees are doing, and it's a very dangerous game to play because people are living longer. The alternative, though, is a whole universe of options, including dividend-paying stock, that are designed to give you income in the form of interest and dividends. And if you're living off your interest and dividends, you don't ever have to worry about running out of money because you're not cannibalizing your portfolio to get your income. And this is something that most retirees have not considered. But the only time you need a plan is if you're spending down and you're selling shares. Then you have to have a plan. But if you're living off interest and dividends, your plan is to never sell a share and still get your income. And I talk about that in More Life Than Money as well. It's a big chapter.
You know, what's interesting, Anthony, you mentioned other financial advisors. Now, I know that this has been the case as I've watched through the years people deal with other financial advisors, is that you just always assume, well, he or she is a financial planner. They obviously know what they're doing. They could be dealing on some wrong assumptions.
And that's the problem, is most financial advisors, I believe, are dealing on a lot of wrong assumptions. You think about the rule of 4%. It's an age-old rule that basically says that if you're invested for growth, you can take out 4% a year. In other words, you can sell 4% a year of shares and really never have to worry about running out of shares. And that works in a bull market. It's worked for the last 13 years when the market's done 15% plus a year. But for the previous 13 years, the first 13 years of this century, from 2000 to 2013, if all you were doing was following the rule of 4%, because that time period for 13 years from 2000 to 2013 was flat, 2 crashes, 2 recoveries, no growth, you would have cannibalized half your principal just by following the rule of 4%. But it's a rule that everyone lives by, and it's been debunked. Morningstar has debunked that rule. Right now they're saying you can only take less than 3% a year if you're invested for growth.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the problems that come along with planning, and that comes down to you got to make some assumptions about some things. Let's talk a little bit about the main ones, and I want to get your feedback. Let's start with health insurance. That's a tough one to plan for. What do you generally tell your clients from the standpoint of how much to allocate towards health insurance or health-related issues?
Yeah, so I think what you're more referring to, Bob, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I think you're referring to long-term care insurance more than health insurance, because health insurance is going to be covered primarily by Medicare, and if you're with a Medicare Advantage plan, it's really not going to be all that expensive. But long-term care insurance, that's a different story. A lot of people think that your health insurance will cover you if you need long-term care, and that's not the case. The best case scenario for any health insurance plan out there is that it will cover you for up to 100 days. After that, you're on your own, and long-term care is very, very expensive. If you want to stay in your home today, it could cost $150,000 a year per person to stay in your home if you need 24-hour care. So it's extremely expensive. And the reality is it is something that you have to plan on. And there's a lot of ways to plan on it. I don't believe that anyone is in the position to self-insure unless you have a net worth of maybe $10 million or more, because it's so expensive. Even then, that's very questionable as to whether that's enough. But insurance is one way to plan to be able to pay for that down the road. And people don't want to spend it, but it's very critical to at least consider it.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Talking to Anthony Saccaro about a great book, More Life Than Money. If you want more information, morelifethanmoney.com. Talking about some assumptions that you've got to make, some things you got to plan for. What about inflation? You know, it's interesting because there's the inflation that the government says we've got, and then there's the inflation that we pay for, and there's a marked difference. And obviously, this inflation is not going to go on forever. But I mean, how do you plan for that as you figure some of these numbers into the future?
Yeah, I think a big mistake is that a lot of retirees don't plan for that. And inflation, until the beginning of the COVID inflationary period, inflation had been hovering around 2%, even a little bit less. The Federal Reserve's goal was to try to get it up to 2%, and that went on for I think since 2008 or 9, so many years. Now inflation peaked at 9%, 2022. Now the CPI number came out this morning, as a matter of fact, and was 6.4%, and it's hovered in the 6% range. Well, the Federal Reserve is now attempting to bring that back down to 2%, and they've done that through very aggressive rate hikes. The challenge with inflation, though, is that most people aren't considering it, and yet the reason I think they're not considering it is twofold. One, they still have some money left over from COVID, although that is going down. The savings rates are going down, so people are spending the money. And the second reason is they're running up debt. But you almost get this feeling, Bob, like, I was pinned up in COVID so much that I'm going to spend my money no matter what. And I don't care if it costs $10, if it costs $5. It's the you only live once spending mentality that I'm going to spend it no matter what. And you almost feel like that's what's driving inflation too.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about really kind of the psychological damage from COVID. I don't think that we really factor that into a lot of things that have happened.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And it goes back to some of what we just mentioned a minute ago, the psychological impact of people being cooped up at home, people not being able to spend money, people not being able to travel. I talk to retirees all the time that retired in 2020, at the beginning of 2020 or end of 2019, and they're like, oh my gosh, I retired to nothing.
Well, let's talk a little bit about a mistake that I see a lot of planners make, and it's important to get this right because everything hinges on this. What kind of an estimated rate of return do you factor in as you grow this money on an average towards retirement?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that is the biggest mistake that retirees and advisors make when they're doing planning is they're assuming that there's going to be some kind of rate of return. There are some things you have to assume. You have to assume when you're going to die. You also have to assume what your rate of return is going to be, but only, Bob, if you're invested for growth. If you have stocks or mutual funds, then you have to guess what they're going to do this next year. You can guess 12% or 15% or whatever number you want. It's purely a guess as to what your stocks or mutual funds are going to do in the next year or 5 years. Now, if you're invested, though, for income, you're invested in things that can get that are promising you and in some situations guaranteeing you interest and dividends, it takes the guessing game out of it. And that's the biggest factor is if you're planning your retirement, do you want to plan a retirement where you're hoping and crossing your fingers and toes that you get some growth and that your growth-oriented portfolio grows where you're hoping it grows? Or do you really want to plan a retirement where you, with a high degree of certainty, know how much income you're going to get from your portfolio? So you have to guess if you're invested for growth, but you don't have to guess if you're invested for income. That's a key differential.
Of course, I agree with you. A financial plan is key. Everybody should have one, no matter where they are. And yet, and I know that you see this in a lot of things that you do, a larger percentage of people don't have one, which begs the question, why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, most percentage of people don't have a financial plan. I met with an individual earlier today, $4 million in the bank, and wants to retire and doesn't know if he can, and says, I've just never done a plan. I have no idea what it would take to retire. And I think it becomes the fact that it's just simply procrastination and they don't know where to go. I'm an estate planning attorney. You know, everyone knows that you should be avoiding probate. You should be doing trusts and wills, and most people haven't done it because of procrastination. I think it's the same thing. It takes time, it takes effort, and people just haven't put in the time and effort. They don't know who to trust. And it's just something that they're just too busy to do. And next thing you know, you're 65 years old and $4 million, and you have no idea whether or not you can retire or not.
You know, it's interesting. I think you seem to be into history as myself when it comes to the markets, and you look at this last year, and what just an unbelievable year when you look at how hard bonds got hit. And of course, stocks getting hit's not that big of a deal because that happens, but bonds especially. What do you tell investors that have gotten so fearful of the market to the point that they're actually even losing sleep over it?
Yeah, well, if you're losing sleep over your investments, you're probably not invested right. And I also believe that if whatever your future plans are, plans to retire, plans to travel, whatever your future plans are, if they're hinged around your portfolio doing well enough to be able to do this stuff, you're invested wrong. It's just not the right way to be invested. The fact, though, that the bond market had a huge 2 years, as a matter of fact, of declines in a row, that's never happened in bond market history. Bond market's down now 40%. And it really depends on whether you're invested in bond funds or whether you're invested in individual bonds. My clients have individual bonds, which means that they've got a maturity date, and they know with a high degree of certainty that they're going to get their money back. Well, you can't say that with bond funds. And when you have individual bonds, you know what your income is going to be. The bond value may fluctuate, but your interest is going to stay the same, and you can spend that interest regardless of the value of the fluctuation. So you might see the paper loss in your portfolio, but if you're living on the interest and you don't have to sell your bonds early, that paper loss means absolutely nothing to you. If you have bond funds, on the other hand, it could be a permanent loss. But I think the Federal Reserve is going to at some point be forced to lower rates again. That's going to cause those bond funds and individual bonds to kick back up in value, and you'll probably have a better time. So I think right now you just stay the course. And if you don't have enough bonds, it's a great buying opportunity. First time in a while that you can actually buy bonds for capital appreciation. That's kind of nice too.
Yeah, it is an interesting concept when you really think about it, that there would be a time where bonds might be a better buy than stocks. I mean, when you look at the risk-reward basis.
Yeah, what happens for listeners that maybe don't understand, is when the bond values drop, the yield goes up. So right now, you can buy a bond at a discount. You're paying less for it than what the bond is actually worth, and you're getting the same income as if you had bought the bond for par value. So now you're going to get that guaranteed income, and when the Federal Reserve lowers rates, well, bonds are going to, they react opposite of interest rates. So when the Federal Reserve lowers rates, these bonds are going to jump back up in value. So it can be an income and capital appreciation play. It's actually really nice. It's probably the best time in 40 years to buy bonds.
You know, when you're working with someone, you start out with that real key piece of information. And the question is, what is your risk level? What do you find is the best way to really determine someone's true risk level?
So I think it really boils down to how much could they afford to lose that will then potentially cost them their dreams and goals. You know, if someone has $1 million and you can get 5% a year, which is really what you should very easily be able to get 5% a year from different income-producing investments today after fees, that means that you get $50,000 a year to live of interest without touching your principal. Now, if someone is going to need that entire $50,000 a year to retire, well, they really can't afford to lose anything, because if they lose 25% of their portfolio, then they're going to lose 25% of that income, and now they won't be able to retire. But on the other hand, if someone only needs $20,000 a year to live, but they could get $50,000 a year, well, then you can position your portfolio with a little more risk, because even if they lost half their portfolio, they can still get the income they need, assuming they're invested right, and let the rest of their portfolio come back. So it really depends on what your income goals are as to how aggressive or how risky you should or should not be with your portfolio.
Once again, Anthony's website is morelifethanmoney.com if you want some more information on the book. Let me bring up annuities and talk a little bit about that. Bad reputation, people really hate them or they like them. They are a fit in some situations, not a fit in the other. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, well, it's funny. And the technical definition of annuity is some type of income stream for life. And I got to tell you, if you're getting a pension out there, well, those lifetime pensions, and you absolutely love annuities, because that's all a pension is an annuity payment. I've never talked to anyone who's getting a pension that doesn't like it. But the commercial annuities, the commercial annuities, Bob, that are put out by insurance companies, those have become more political because hundreds of billions of dollars have flown from mutual funds and stock-based investments into annuities over the last 15 or 20 years. Because index annuities promise to protect your principal, but still give you a piece of the action of what the stock market does. So you have a lot of old school advisors that are charging you a fee of 1 or 2% a year to manage your money, and now when you take that money out to put it into an annuity, they don't get that fee anymore. So they start talking trash about the annuities, not because it's not good for you, but generally because it's not good for them. And I think people need to understand that. The SEC is in the same boat, Bob. The SEC would collect a fee on mutual funds, but because they don't regulate annuities, they don't collect the fee. So the SEC doesn't want to see all this money going into annuities either, because they're losing the fees that they're charging these big brokerage firms. So they've become a competing product that are not right for everybody, but in certain situations they are. But if you read whatever you read on there about annuities, you Google it, you're going to see more bad information than good, and it's not true. It's all biased information.
So let me give out the bias alert before I say what I'm going to say. I think you and I both agree a financial advisor plays a critical role when it comes to the retirement process. So you got to be careful in picking one out. I mean, what are you looking for when you're picking a financial advisor?
So I think there's really 3 different advisors that you can pick. You can pick yourself, you can pick a broker, or you can pick a registered investment advisor. Of course, if you pick yourself, you're doing it on your own, and you might have a back-end phone number, but you really don't have anyone helping you, and they're certainly not helping you with regard to their whole situation with your situation. Now, a broker is where it gets very confusing. Brokers work for a large firm, and they're only going to help you with regards to the money that firm has. And that money that firm has is probably just a small piece of your entire retirement puzzle. And they don't have the responsibility to act in your best interest. They don't have a fiduciary standard. They have a suitability standard. And if you think about it, they work for the firm. The the fiduciary standard they have is for the firm they work with, not for the client, and that shocks a lot of clients when they read about that in my book. But that's the situation. So most people think that having a fee-only registered investment advisor who is a fiduciary is the best way to go. And I would agree with that because they legally have to act in your best interest. And as your portfolio goes up, so does their fee. So that's really, you're going to get the best advice, in my opinion, from the fee-only fiduciary financial advisors like we are at Providence Financial.
So let's talk a little bit about some red flags when picking a financial advisor, because there are things that pop up that I don't know about this, and probably a good idea to walk out the door. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's very interesting that, in order to call yourself a financial advisor, maybe you have to take one test. It's not like a doctor who, has to go through a lot of residency and take, a lot of tests. It's certainly not like me as an attorney have to pass the bar exam after years of school. You can study for 90 days and take one test and call yourself a financial advisor. So what you have is you have a lot of salespeople out there who are disguised as financial advisors. A lot of life insurance agents, guess what? They call themselves financial advisors. Well, they're not financial advisors. Their goal is to sell you a life insurance policy. There's a lot of mutual fund guys out there that they don't sell life insurance. They hate life insurance. They're going to call themselves a financial advisor, but their goal is to sell you mutual funds. And so I think you do need to understand what is it that the person is trying to sell you. It's the registered investment advisor that really is going to be in the best position to sit down with you and to carve out what your retirement needs to look like, how you need to be invested. Are you taking too much risk? Are you getting enough income? Do you have to worry about running out of money? Because most registered investment advisors like myself have all the tools available to them and own the firms, are not working for these big brokerage firms, and they have the independent capability to help you with all of your retirement and not just one piece.
So it leads me to my last question. And this idea is thankfully almost dead, but it's still alive and well. What are your opinions on robo-advisors?
So I'm not a big fan of robo-advisors. It sounds techie, right? The millennials like it because it sounds like we're going to put this information in, and some brainiac somewhere is going to come up with a plan for you. And it makes it sound good, but it's really nothing more than a model that have been around for decades, these model portfolios. A lot of brokerage firms will have model portfolios to where if you're in model number 3, you have the exact same investments, the exact same positions, the exact same allocation as everybody else in that model, and a robo-form is nothing more than a sexier way for you to put information in and get led to believe that there's going to be this major transaction behind the scenes and helping you out. It's nothing more than a model. You get the same thing as everybody else.
Name of the book is More Life Than Money, How Not to Outlive Your Savings. Anthony Saccaro. Anthony, thank you so much for being on the program today, and love the book, and something that people should read. MoreLifeThanMoney.com is the website. Thanks a lot, Anthony.
Bob, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I generally don't bring advisors onto the program because of I'm very particular about the advice that a lot of advisors give. This is a pretty solid book. Anthony Saccaro is once again his name. More Life Than Money: How Not to Outlive Your Savings. He does point out a lot of which I would agree are some real problems with the industry, with the practice of financial planning, and really. I just keep coming back to the importance of education and how and making decisions and how all that works together. MoreLifeThanMoney.com is the name of the website. If you have a question for me, please go to the website at PrudentMoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.